Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you all very much for attending the WFO Asia Pacific Summit 2023. On behalf of the organizer and co-organizers, I would like to warmly welcome all of you here today. The development of offshore wind in the Asia Pacific region has certainly taken flight in the recent years. The WFO Asia Pacific Summit 2023 is dedicated to addressing critical common agendas concerning the outlook of the development of offshore wind, floating offshore wind, sustainable supply chain management, and offshore wind finance in the Asia Pacific region. We hope that through today's presentations and our panel discussions, new opportunities may be inspired and challenges may be transformed into new opportunities. Before continuing into our program, I would like to first welcome a few guests for opening remarks. Firstly, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the Managing Director of World Forum Offshore Wind, Mr. Gunnar Herzig, for his speech. Welcome. Welcome.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Deputy Minister of the National Development Council, Mrs. Xian Kui Kao, Deputy Director General of the Bureau of Energy, Mr. Chung Li, representatives of trade offices, industry leaders and experts, press media representatives, and ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is my honor to welcome all of you to today's WFO Asia Pacific Summit. As we gather here today, we recognize that the offshore wind industry in the Asia-Pacific region is gaining momentum, and it is vital that we address critical common themes concerning upcoming developments, floating offshore wind, sustainable supply chain management, and offshore wind finance. Our goal is to create an even more attractive, practical, and innovative offshore wind industry that can better prepare us for the future. We acknowledge the impressive progress made in Taiwan in terms of the development of offshore wind under the drive towards the energy transition and zero emissions. However, we also recognize the challenges that we need to overcome and that this summit provides the opportunity to discuss, exchange, and inspire creative solutions. We are excited about the upcoming industry announcements, progress, and initiatives for Taiwan and the entire Asia-Pacific region. We are privileged to have 40 industry leaders and experts here to share their valuable insights on how we can shape the Asia-Pacific region into a sustainable and successful offshore wind industry. During the next 2 days, I encourage you to take this unique opportunity to engage in conversations with peers from around the world to explore exciting new collaborations and opportunities. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all our co-organizers, sponsors, and staff members, especially David Chiang, WFO's Taiwan representative, who have made this WFO Asia Pacific Summit a reality. Your contributions and support are truly appreciated. In closing, I wish all of you a successful and fruitful 2 days ahead. Thank you very much again for being here today, and I hope you will enjoy the event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Herzig, for the opening remarks. May I kindly request you to return to your seats? And next, I would like to invite the Deputy Minister of the National Development Council, Ms. Xian Kui Kao, to the stage for opening remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome.
Mr. Gunnar Herzig, Manager Director of WFO, Mr. Li Junli, Deputy Director General Bureau of Energy, MOEA. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning.
Morning.
Today, I am honored to attend this great event on behalf of the National Development Council. First of all, I would like to express our appreciation to the organizer, WFO, for holding this Asia Pacific Summit in Taiwan this year. And I heartily welcome all of you coming to Taiwan to take part in this wonderful occasion. Meanwhile, I would also like to take this opportunity to thank all the guests who has been devoted to promoting the development of offshore wind power in Taiwan as well. During the Earth Days in 2021, President Tsai has declared the transition to net zero emission by 2050 as a common goal that Taiwan and the whole world is working toward. In 2022, our government has also announced Taiwan's pathway to net zero emissions by 2050, as well as the associated 12 key strategies. This year, the goal to achieve net zero emission by 2015 has been formally written into our law, and the implementation has formally kicked off as a result. Energy transition is one of the most crucial strategies for fulfilling Taiwan's net zero transition. Maximizing renewable energy, especially the development of offshore wind power, is our top priorities. This is because currently the fossil fuel power generation is the main source of the electricity in Taiwan. And Taiwan has thus a relatively high electricity carbon emission factors. Furthermore, Taiwan is an export-oriented country. The EU has established the C-band, and the multinational corporations are joining the RE100s, which is committed to the use of the green electricity as an important link in the international supply chains. This is thus extremely vital for Taiwan to have abundant and stable supplies of green electricity. In view of this trend, the government will continue to carry out our development plan, including increasing the capacity of ports and establish a stable and resilient power grid. Meanwhile, carbon finance is another key issue to achieving the goal of the consistent supply of the energies. The Taiwan Stock Exchange and the National Development Fund, in collaboration with our EPA, are in discussion to establish a carbon exchange platform, which will facilitate international collaborations in the global effort to reduce the carbon emissions. With the provision of the above-mentioned administrative support, our government aims to foster an enabling environment for developing offshore wind power. And we hope that domestic and international development would work together to accelerate the offshore wind power project in Taiwan. Our government will actively seek out the opportunities for national collaborations in these areas, and we are to demonstrate to the world Taiwan's determination to become the green energy development center of the Asia Pacific region in the foreseeable future. Lastly, I would like to thank the WFO once again for organizing today's forum, as it's a major event of the global offshore wind power industry, as well as an important platform for our homegrown firm to connect with their international counterparts. And let me take this opportunity to wish you a big success in advance. Also, I wish you all good health and great fortune. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister Gao. I would like to invite Deputy Minister to remain on the stage as we would like to take this opportunity and take a group photo. I would like to invite the following guests to come up stage. And once again, please welcome Managing Director of the World Forum Offshore Wind, Mr. Gunnar Herzig, to come back on stage. Welcome. Welcome. And next, please welcome Deputy Director General of Bureau of Energy, Mr. Zhongli Li. Welcome. Next, please welcome Executive Director of Canadian Trade Office in Taipei, Mr. James Steffernickel. Welcome. Director of the Trade Council of Denmark Taipei, Mr. Peter Sand. Welcome. Thanks for coming here today. And next, please welcome Director General of the Spanish Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Eduardo Euba Aldape. Welcome. Deputy Director General of German Institute Taipei, Ms. Dagmar Evans. Welcome. Director of Economic and Growth of British Office, Ms. Jessica Henry. Welcome. Executive Director of German Trade Office Taipei, Mr. Axel Limburg. Vice President of Taiwan Institute of Economic Research, Dr. Junli Zhou. Welcome. And now please welcome Chairman of Floating Offshore Wind Committee of World Forum Offshore Wind, Mr. Bruno Gescher. Since we have quite a lot of guests today on stage, we will need everyone to please come closer to each other. All right? And then we will need to look forward into our camera in the front. So our cameraman is waving his hand right now. So let's take our first picture. 1, 2, 3. Please give us a bright smile. 1, 2, 3. Okay, for the next picture, please give us a thumb up. And once again, look into our camera. Okay, we will like to ask our guests to please remain seated for the picture. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Do we have a good picture? Well, okay, wonderful. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank our guests today for coming here. I would like to invite our guests to please return to your seat, and we will begin our program shortly. Thank you. 谢谢. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we will now officially begin our program. This morning, we will be focusing on the outlook of offshore wind development in Asia Pacific. It is with great honor and pleasure to welcome our first speaker to the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Managing Director of World Forum Offshore Wind, Mr. Gunnar Herzig, to once again come up stage to give us his presentation on a global perspective on offshore wind development. Please give him a round of applause. Welcome.
Great, thank you very much. Perfect, yeah, I hope you can see the slides. Yeah, thanks very much again, everyone, for being here. It's my great pleasure to tell you a bit more about the global perspective on offshore wind developments. And before we jump into the presentation, let me just tell you a few words about WFO and who we are as the World Forum Offshore Wind. So we are a non-profit organization promoting offshore wind energy worldwide. Our members represent the complete offshore wind value chain, and we have, of course, an international setup with offices in Hamburg, Taipei, Tokyo, and New York. And on the next slide, you can just see an overview of all our members. By now, we have more than 110 members in total, and as you can see, nice collection of very international companies from all parts of the supply chain, including big developers, manufacturers, law firms, service firms, engineering firms, research organizations, other non-profit organizations. So very happy to have this great group of members already on board. In case you are not a member of WFO yet, please do consider joining us. We're always looking to grow our membership base. But now let's jump into the overview of global offshore wind installations. And on this slide, which is taken from our latest Global Offshore Wind Report, which summarizes the global installed capacity until the end of last year, end of 2022. And you can see that globally, in total, we have a capacity of roughly 58 gigawatts installed. And last year, 42 new offshore wind farms, individual offshore wind farms, have been taken into operation. And in total, we now have 257 offshore wind farms in operation, of which 140 are located in Asia, 115 in Europe, and 2 in the US. And you can see the breakdown by market in more detail on this slide. And here you can see that we have basically 3 types of markets. We have 3 big markets, China, the UK, and Germany. We have 3 medium-sized markets, the Netherlands, Denmark, and Belgium, and then quite a few very interesting emerging markets with a capacity below 1 gigawatt of installed capacity, but of course rapidly growing in many cases. And for example, last year, France and Japan installed their first commercial scale offshore wind projects, which is always a big step to see that larger offshore wind farms are taken into operation. In the case of France, the big Saint-Nazaire project with 480 megawatts was taken into operation, and in Japan, the Akita Noshiro Port project with 140 megawatts. And if we now try to look a bit into the future, let me share this forecast, which was provided to us by Bloomberg New Energy Finance for our latest global offshore wind report. And here you can see a bit of a forecast until 2035. And according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance, the growth will be pretty significant over the next couple of years, especially after 2030, where roughly 50 gigawatts of capacity will be added globally every year. And according to Bloomberg, the total capacity by 2035 could be around 519 gigawatts. And if we remember, by the end of last year, we had 58 gigawatts. So that means roughly a tenfold increase between now and 2035. And in addition to the capacity that will be added, which is mainly going to be bottom fixed, Bloomberg New Energy Finance also mentions 2 trends that we will see over the next couple of years to become more and more relevant. Here we have floating offshore wind, which we'll hear more about later today, and also offshore wind to hydrogen, where green offshore wind electricity is used for producing green hydrogen. And to make things a bit more specific, not just looking at the forecast, let me show you a few selected government targets around the world, just to illustrate the growth path that we will be looking at over the next couple of years. Here you can see some selected government targets for offshore wind for the UK, Germany, Poland, the US, and Japan. And you can see the status quo by the end of last year of installed capacity, and then the 2030 target. And as you can see, the targets in many cases are very ambitious and really significant. In the case of the UK, a 50 gigawatt target. And remember, the UK is already the second largest market in the world, so already quite some capacity installed, almost 14 gigawatt, but that still leaves a more than 36 gigawatt gap to be closed within 7 years. And as you know, offshore wind farms are not being built overnight. It really takes years of development and then to build things. So if you want something to be online by 2030, you really need to get going right now. And therefore, this just illustrates how much capacity will hopefully be added over the next couple of years to close those gaps in many markets around the world. And just taking those 5 markets, we can see that the gap that exists between today's capacity and the targeted 2030 capacity is roughly 100 gigawatts just for those 5 markets. And that, of course, means that we need a massive build-out starting pretty much immediately. And just to illustrate the enormous investments connected to those installations, if we take this very rough rule of thumb, which applies to maybe more or less European offshore wind farms for bottom fixed, where we say very roughly it maybe costs 3 million euros to install 1 megawatt of offshore wind capacity bottom fixed in Europe, then 1 gigawatt requires 3 billion, and therefore 100 gigawatts require 300 billion euros of investments. So we're really talking about significant investments that need to be made over the next couple of years. And what does that mean in terms of challenges? So there is, of course, the supply chain challenge. To install all of that capacity over the next couple of years, we really need to strengthen and expand supply chains wherever possible. If they're any support that governments can provide to supply chains, that's always very helpful, because we really need to make sure that all the components necessary for that kind of build-out can be produced and are available when needed. Another big challenge that always needs to be considered is grid connection, of course. Here it's not just the offshore grid connection, but also the onshore grid connection that needs to build out in parallel to the offshore wind farms to make sure that the electricity that's being produced can also be exported to where it's needed. And then another challenge always, of course, is regulation. So we need to make sure that regulation is always stable and clear, especially over the time of those investments that are being taken, so that developers have a clear and stable framework to work with. And if possible, it would be great if permitting processes can always be made as efficient as possible, so to speed up permitting processes wherever possible would always help developments and to make sure that we can really reach the 2030 targets. If we now have a look at two of the mega trends in the offshore wind industry, because most of the growth until 2030 will be bottom-fixed offshore wind, but there are, of course, other big trends that we're already seeing and that are emerging over the next couple of years in more force. And there is, of course, floating offshore wind, which is already a big topic. And just as a reminder, floating offshore wind could really be the next kind of quantum leap for the offshore wind industry, because floating really removes the water depth as the limiting factor for offshore wind and opens up all new deep water markets around the world for offshore wind, which are currently not suitable for bottom-fixed installations. The other big trend that we're seeing right now is offshore wind to hydrogen, where we use offshore wind electricity to be used for an electrolysis process to create green hydrogen. And since this is such a big topic in many countries around the world, we think offshore wind can also play a major role in those new green hydrogen economies that will emerge over the next couple of years. And we as WFO are, of course, trying to address many of the challenges with regards to those new topics, floating and offshore wind to hydrogen. We have our very active Floating Offshore Wind Committee in place, which is chaired by Bruno Geschier, who we'll hear from later today. And we have 4 very active subcommittees in place where very specific topics such as insurance for floating offshore wind, mooring lines, O&M, cables and floating substations, all in the context of floating offshore wind, are discussed among our members in great detail, and we're trying to come up with recommendations and solutions to some of the problems we're facing in those areas. And then we always try to summarize what has been discussed and what the recommendations are in our white papers, which you can see there on the slide, and which are also publicly available on our website. For offshore wind to hydrogen, which is a bit of a newer topic, we also have our Offshore Wind to Hydrogen Committee in place, which was created last year. And here we have our first subcommittee on regulation already up and running. And since offshore wind to hydrogen is such a new topic, which everybody is very excited about, but it's at a comparatively early stage. And I think we as an organization try to just kind of discuss and lay out the basic principles to some extent and try to learn more about what the different options are to produce green hydrogen from offshore wind. And at this point, there are still many different options. And I think at this point, nobody quite knows what will be the most suitable options. You could, for example, produce green hydrogen in a centralized way where you have one big electrolyzer on a platform, or maybe even an energy island close to an offshore wind farm. But you could also have electrolyzers decentralized, attached to the individual offshore wind turbine, or even as integral part of the offshore wind turbine. And nobody quite knows which type of technology will really be the best option. And therefore, at this point, I think we need to discuss all the different options that we have on the table and try to understand more about the implications. And then I'm sure over the next couple of years, more and more kind of details will emerge what will be the best solution to produce green hydrogen using offshore wind electricity. So in conclusion, if we have a look at the roadmap until 2030, we can really say that a massive offshore wind build-out is required immediately to make sure we can reach those ambitious 2030 targets that many countries have in place. In terms of floating offshore wind, we really hope to see the first commercial-scale floating offshore wind projects being successfully built and operated towards 2030. And in terms of offshore wind to hydrogen, we hope that the first demonstration projects will be installed in different markets around the world before 2030 to then make sure that offshore wind to hydrogen can really kick off on a commercial scale after 2030 once we've learned how to do it. And then if we reach our 2030 targets, we believe there's a good chance that we can then reach the 2040 or 2050 targets that countries have to really have the required offshore wind capacity in place to meet the net zero targets. So we really believe that the 2020s will be a defining decade for the offshore wind industry to really make sure that we can deliver as an industry on the targets that many countries have set. But to achieve that, international collaboration and global knowledge exchange is definitely required because offshore wind always needs to be considered in a global context. And we as WFO will definitely do our utmost to support the industry in this exciting journey ahead and in this global collaboration. So that's it from my side for now. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Managing Director Herzik, for the comprehensive presentation. Please return to your seat. Thank you. And next, please welcome Deputy Director General of Bureau of Energy, Mr. Junli Li. He will share his presentation on the peak of offshore wind in Taiwan at year 2035. Welcome.
Okay, good morning. It's my privilege to be here to share some information about the Taiwan offshore wind policy, especially at the year 2030. My presentation today will include the policy of offshore wind development and the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, the three-phase development policy. And then we were talking about the floating offshore wind project. And we will do a short recap after we discussing all these slides. So firstly, I would like to introduce Taiwan's energy situation. Taiwan is a small island and short of the indigenous energy resources and heavily rely on the fossil fuel. That's why we have to develop the renewable energy and especially the wind energy in Taiwan because it is not only the green energy but also the indigenous energy resources. And our target is promote the offshore wind to 5.6 gigawatt by year 2025. And we will continue to promote it to 20.6 gigawatt by year 2033. But when we decided this project, at that time we don't have much experience about how to promote the offshore wind energy. So we set a three-stage development policy. We can see in the first stage, we will set a demo project in Taiwan to test the Taiwan market or the natural environment situation. And then we have a zonal potential project. That means we set the good environment to attract the international experienced offshore wind development to come to Taiwan. We facilitate the approving system in this space. And then we will expand the capacity of the offshore wind. That is the phase 2, phase 3. Right now, we are in the phase 3. So let's dive a little deeper to each phase. In the phase 1, as I mentioned, at that time, we don't have much experience about offshore wind. We don't know how to develop the offshore wind. So we have the offshore demonstration incentive program in year 2012. And we provide the good incentive for the pioneer and attract them to come to Taiwan. And there are 2 demo projects approved by the government. And all this demo project was commissioned in Taiwan. The first one is Formosa Demo Wind Farm. The total installed capacity is 128 megawatt. And this project was commissioned by the end of year 2019. And the other is Taipower Demo Wind Farm. Taipower is state-owned company, and they participate in the demo project. And the total capacity is 109 megawatt. And this project was commissioned as well. And this project commissioned in year 2021. So we finished these two demo projects, and then we move on to the phase 2, what we call the zone of potential, because in this phase, the government select 36 great potential offshore wind farms in Taiwan and open to the market. Because when the foreigner, they went to Taiwan, they don't know Taiwan's geological situation, the wind situation, or the current situation. So government do the first step to select the 36 great potential areas. And the government do the strategic environment assessment. And the developer only have to do the detailed environment impact assessment for their individual wind farm. But the government do the big scale wind farm environment assessment. So by this way, we attract the international experience, the offshore wind farm developer come to Taiwan. And we use two kind of mechanism in this space. The first mechanism we approve the project is the selection mechanism. That means the government will select the wind farm project by the capability review. We will do the technology capability review and the financial capability review, and then we have a project named Industrial Relevance Project, or maybe you can say it's local content project. We review the project by these three factors, and then we select 10 projects in the selection process, and the total capacity is 3.8 gigawatt. And another mechanism we use in this phase is the auction process. That means we approve the project by bidding, and the lower price get the priority. And there are 4 projects get the government consent in this stage. The total installed capacity is 1.6 megawatt. So there are 14 projects come from 7 developers in the phase 2. Right now, all this project is commissioned and in the construction stage. We can see that 2 of these project is commissioned, and the other is under the construction or pre-construction stage. Right now, there are 208 pieces of the offshore wind farm installed already, and the other 357 pieces of offshore wind farm is under the construction stage. And we will finish 565 pieces of the offshore wind farm by year 2025 or 2026 because the pandemic issues, because of the COVID impact. Some project will be delayed 1 year. So let's move on to the phase 3. Based on the phase 1 and phase 2 experience, we announced the phase 3 project. The phase 3 will start from the year 2026 to 2035, and the total capacity will be 15 gigawatts. That means within these 10 years, we will release 1.5 gigawatt annually. Each year, we will open the capacity to the market. And the selection mechanism we combined with the phase 2, the selection process and the auction process. So we have a hybrid mechanism to approve the project. That is we will do the capability review and the bidding process. So the project, the firstly, they have to pass the capability review, and then they go to the bidding process. Because the 10 years from year 2022 to 23. 10 years is not a short term. So we divided this 10 years to 2 stages. The first stage will from year 2026 to 2031. That means the first 6 years is the stage 1, and the other 4 years is the stage 2. Once again, we divided the stage 1 to 3 round selection process. Every 2 years is a round, and we will release 3 gigawatt in a round. The first round project have to commissioned by year 2026 to 2027, and we select the first round project already. And so right now we are prepared to select the second round offshore wind farm project. On our schedule, we will select the second round project by the end of this year. And all these selected projects have to commission by year 2028 and 2029. And we schedule to hold the third round selection process on year 2024. And all these projects have commissioned by year 2030 and the year 2031. And regarding to the second stage, we will wait and see what will happen in the stage 1. So maybe we will tune the mechanism when we finish the first 6 years of phase 2. Of phase 3. So we will, right now we will finish the third round selection process, and then we will prepare the second stage. This is the outcome of the first round selection. We announced this selection mechanism by year 2021, and then we finished the capability review and the bidding process by the end of last year. And all these approved offshore wind farm projects have to sign the administration contract with the government before next month. So if they don't sign the administration contract with the government, will remove that project. And there are 3 wind farm projects selected by the government, and we can see 2 of the projects will commissioned in year 2026, and the other 5 projects will commissioned by year 2027, and the total capacity is 3 gigawatt. So as I mentioned before, right now we are prepared to select the second round project. And we will adjust some mechanism in the about the first round. That means we will take the experience from the first round, because some offshore wind developers, they are not so satisfied about the first round selection. For example, they think the capacity is too small. Maybe in the next round, in the round 2, we will scale up the capacity, and some opinions, we will collect the opinions by the explanatory meeting. So right now, we want to collect much more opinions from the first round, and we can have a resource to tune or to adjust the second round mechanism. And this slide shows the floating wind farm, because until now, all the offshore wind in Taiwan is the fixed bottom offshore wind. We don't have the floating bottom. But when the government wants to promote so many offshore wind farms in Taiwan, we have to go to deep and the deeper areas. And the shallow areas is not enough for us to develop the offshore wind. And if we go to the deeper areas, we have to develop the floating offshore wind in Taiwan. Once again, we don't have much experience about the floating system. So we will learn the experience. We will copy the mechanism like we develop the wind farm in Taiwan. So we will start from the demo system, just like the fixed bottom system. So we will have a demo system to test the Taiwan market. And our mechanism right now is not released yet. Right now we are discussing about how to design this, how to plan this mechanism. So right now we are scheduled to, we have an explanatory meeting in the first quarter already, but right now we still collect the information about the floating type. And we will announce, we will schedule to announce the selection mechanism by the end of this year. And all these projects under our schedule have to commission by year 2028. And the selection mechanism will similar to the first few phases. We will do the capability review, including the technology capability, financial capability, and the industry cooperation. That means in this phase, we are not specify which kind of the local industry you want to cooperate, but you can select your cooperator in Taiwan, and that will add some score for your project. And this is our draft until now. But in the future, maybe someone discuss about the bidding system. So maybe in the future, we will add the bidding system to the selection process, because the reason is very difficult to decide the feed-in tariff about the floating system. There are so many different types of the floater, something like the semi-submersible floater, or the tension leg floater, or the spar buoy floater. So many kind of the floating system, and the cost is different. So for the government, we are very difficult to decide the price. So maybe in the future, we will have a bidding process to decide this. And regarding to the scale, is many offshore wind developers care about the scale. At the beginning, we are scheduled to release 100 megawatt project, but someone told us it is too small. It is not the economic scale for the offshore wind developer. So right now, maybe we will change the scale system to the floater. Each project will have 6 to 12 floater. We calculate the floater and not the capacity. And we will, under our schedule, we will select 2 or 3 demo projects in the floating demo project. So finally, let's do a short recap. And in year 2030, the total installed capacity in Taiwan will go to 20 gigawatt, and it will generate 77 gigawatt hour annually. And we can reduce the carbon emission 38 million tons per year. And the total investment will close to $94 billion. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Director General, for your wonderful presentation. Please return to your seat. Next, please welcome Ms. Ming Long Chang, Country Manager of EDF Renewables Taiwan, to share her presentation on an outlook of offshore wind development in Asia Pacific at year 2035. Please give her a round of applause. Welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, 大家好, good morning. First of all, thank you for having us today. Us being EDF Renewables, me here, and the team in a room as well. So I would like to start with a short presentation about who we are. EDF Renewables is an entity fully owned by EDF Group, a global company with a presence in more than 25 countries in the world. We generate electricity from nuclear, hydro, solar, offshore wind, onshore wind, and other energies as well. So today we have more than 1,165 employees working in EDF Renewables, in EDF Group. among them 4.5 thousand are dedicated in renewable energy. So today, with all the different energies combined, hydro, solar, wind, in 2022, the net installed capacity has reached 36 gigawatts worldwide. Here we can see the different pipelines that EDF Renewables currently has. We operate more than 1.3 gigawatts offshore wind project in the world. And currently we have also more than 10 gigawatts of pipeline under development and under construction. The historical focus market was in European market, but we also have footprints in the UK, the United States, these markets as well. In the headquarters, we have more than 600 experts working dedicated in offshore wind technology. And these 600 experts have been very busy in the past years, especially in the past 6 months. We had a good news since December 2022 until recently. And I would like to let you know that the first good news started in Taiwan. So thank you for having us among the round 3 auction projects. Our first project, Huanfeng, that's a fixed bottom project with 440 megawatts. And that's in collaboration with the Taiwanese local developer called Taiya Energy. So we have been selected in that auction. And 2 months after, in Australia, the EDF Australia office has announced the acquisition of a 2 gigawatt pipeline in floating offshore wind, which is currently under development. 1 month after, in March, good news happened in France. We have won the AO4 tender. The official name is Centre Manche 1, that project. With the 1 gigawatt installed capacity, currently it's the biggest tender in the history of French offshore wind. No more than 2 weeks ago in Ireland, we have also been selected through the project Codelink as one of the projects been awarded with a CFD contract as well. So you can see that in Taiwan, that was a 440 megawatts. The other projects, they were all around the gigawatts size scale. In parallel, we were also been preparing for France, for Norway, for Germany, the USA, etc. We look forward to have more good news in very short time. Even though Taiwan is not among the gigawatt scale projects, but we do see a lot of similarities between Taiwan and French markets. Currently, as I just mentioned, we have 2 projects in Taiwan. The first one is Ocean, called Huanyang, and the second one is Ocean Harvest. We see the opportunities in Taiwan as a very good market to showcase, to leverage what we have been doing in France. You probably know that a few months ago, we just had our first commercial scale project inaugurated in France. That's the Saint-Nazaire project, 480 megawatts. And we're also building 2 projects in France. That's Fécamp and Coursol. Both of them around 480 megawatts. What's worth mentioning is that we're also building a floating pilot project called PGL in the south of France. And we think that this ongoing experiences and this hands-on practice that we're having in offshore wind, in floating offshore wind, can be very beneficial to the Taiwanese market, who is in need of this kind of real experiences in building a floating project. Coming back to what we're talking about today is how the offshore wind market will look like to 2030 and beyond. So here we can see that this is a report provided to us by 4C Offshore. Today, with all the projects with maturity from FID made, the scale is around 86.4 gigawatts. And according to 4C Offshore, in 2030, there will be an extra 183 gigawatt added to this current 86 gigawatts. The average growth rate each year is almost 16%. So as previously mentioned by the other speakers, the three big markets will be China, Germany, and UK. And what's worth mentioning here is that among this almost 270 gigawatts in 2030, there will be almost 14 gigawatts being floating. So how to be part of this floating market? Again, according to the 4C Offshore report, the market attractiveness is very important here. And what can make a market being attractive for the developers? Among the different criteria, the most important will be the regulatory. A clear, stable, consistent regulatory system is key to the developers. And secondly, the supply chain is another reason why the developers will choose your market instead of others. So we can see that according to 4C Offshore, the 6 most attractive markets would be the UK, Norway, and the first one in APAC region will be South Korea. Another one is Japan. France, we are the 6th market which considered the most interesting, thanks to what we have been doing in the past 10 years. So what have we been doing in the past 10 years? The government, CRE, that's the National Regulatory of Energy, has started the tender in 2015, actually even earlier than that. Because today, all the sites, they were previously testing sites in France. So we can say that the history of offshore wind in France has started even before 2015. So in 2015, there were 4 projects being selected. These 4 projects being 3 of them in the Mediterranean area and 1 of them in Brittany. And all these awarded projects, they provide a combination of different technologies, meaning different floaters with different wind turbines. EDF Renewables, we're very proud to be one of the Mediterranean Sea pilot projects called PGL, which I just already mentioned. So what's worth mentioning here is also that among these 4 projects, unfortunately, one of them, not very long time ago, the sponsors, they have decided to stop the development of the project, which is the one in the Brittany area. That's called the GUA project. Even though that the sponsors have decided to stop the development, that does not mean the region say no to this technology. Actually, the acceptability in this region toward floating industry has increased enormously thanks to this development. Because a demo project is not only here to be built, it's here to collect experiences to demonstrate the capability and the potential of a project. So in Goa, in Brittany area, even though the project has stopped, but the local community has urged the French government to continue to develop floating offshore wind in this region. So in parallel, when the developers, they are doing what they should do, the government is working on the project to facilitate the future implementation of the commercial scale floating project. So as you can see here, this is one of the harbor which is currently under extension. This harbor's name is Port de la Nouvelle. So they have started to extend existing breakwaters, and the goal is eventually that in 2030, when the commercial scale floating project will be online, this facility will be ready to accommodate, to welcome all the building, all the constructions of all this more than 5 megawatts scale projects. So quickly on the project PGL, Provence Grand Large, we have 3 8-megawatt wind turbines on the tension leg platform, TLP, which Mr. Lee just mentioned. TLP is currently under construction. Once built, it will be the first one and the only demo project using this technology. The reasons that this technology has been selected, it's because the mooring system is relatively vertical, giving it a smaller area attached to the ground, so that the impact to the fishery, to the pleasant boat, etc., it's smaller comparing to other technologies. You all know that Mediterranean Sea area is an area with a lot of tourism activities, is one of the most, if I may say, beautiful places in the world. So that's one of the reasons that the TLP technology was selected as well. But again, if you remember in one of the previous slides, you see that among all the different pipelines that EDF Renewables currently have, we don't use systematically one single technology. We change technology from site to site, because what's the most important is the site condition of each project. So even though that we use TLP here, that was because that was the most pertinent in this area 10 years ago. So I'm very happy and very proud to share with you the latest photos that we have from the site. Actually, these photos are no more than 2 weeks. So you can see that the 3 floaters, they're ready to be. They're originally on the quayside, and you can see on the second photo in between, on the upper part, that the floaters, first of all, they need to be float off to be loaded off to the barge, to the submersible barge. And the third photo that you can see here is from another angle, that the barge will drag the floaters to the sea. Once it's at the pertinent place, they will then float off. So you can see on the last photo, that's a photo that we can see from this angle. You can still see the two big towers of the barge. And if you see the photo in the middle, now this barge has let the floater to float. So currently, these 3 floaters, they're all in water. So that's 2 weeks ago, we had only 1 operation, but today, the 3 floaters, they are all in the water. If we can have a quick look of the video.
Le parc éolien de Provence-Grand Large est un projet pilote de 3 éoliennes flottantes sélectionnées en 2016 par l'État et fruit d'une grande concertation avec les acteurs du territoire. Il repose sur une innovation technologique majeure de plateforme à ligne d'ancrage tendue, conçue et développée par SBM Offshore et IFP Énergie Nouvelle. Cette technologie permet d'installer le parc au large du golfe de Fos, à 17 km de la plage Napoléon à Port-Saint-Louis-du-Rhône. À cette distance, les vents sont parmi les plus puissants et les profondeurs d'eau peuvent atteindre 100 mètres. Sur le quai Gloria à Port-Saint-Louis-du-Rhône, une étape importante vient de se dérouler, l'arrivée des composants des éoliennes. Les 9 pales de 75 mètres chacune, les 3 moyeux, éléments permettant d'assembler les pales entre elles, les 3 nacelles, éléments abritant les équipements électriques principaux, et les 3 mâts divisés en 3 sections. Provence Grand Large utilisera des éoliennes Siemens Gamesa d'une puissance de 8,4 MW de dernière génération. Le rotor, partie rotative de l'éolienne composée des pales et du moyeu, a un diamètre de 154 mètres. Les éoliennes sont dites à entraînement direct, elles ne disposent pas de boîte de vitesse. Elles fonctionnent grâce à une génératrice à aimant permanent permettant de transformer directement l'énergie mécanique en électricité compatible avec le réseau électrique. D'un point de vue technique, on peut également noter que les pales sont conçues en un seul bloc, offrant ainsi une grande résistance du composant. Les éoliennes produiront de l'électricité dans des vitesses de vent comprises entre 10 et 90 km/h. Dans les prochaines semaines, les flotteurs dont l'assemblage vient de s'achever seront mis à l'eau pour rejoindre le quai Gloria. Les éoliennes y seront assemblées avant d'être remorquées et contrôlées au quai Gravelot pour enfin rejoindre le site d'implantation au large. Lors de sa mise en service, Provence Grand Large fournira l'équivalent de la consommation électrique annuelle de 45 000 personnes. Pour comparaison, cela correspond environ à la population de Port-Saint-Louis-du-Rhône, Fos-sur-Mer et Port-de-Bouc réunis. Grâce à cette technologie flottante, Provence Grand Large inaugure une nouvelle filière de l'éolien flottant en mer Méditerranée.
So the success of this project is not only technical, it's also financial. To build a project like this, we had enjoyed the feed-in tariff from the French government, but also the special supporting mechanism called ADEME, that's the investment for future, and also the subsidies from the EU, and also that at the end of the video that you also see the logo of this local government. So very quickly, I know that we're running out of time here. So among all this, what we have witnessed is that currently the industry is facing a lot of challenges because the resources are limited. And the limited resource, they will go to the markets which they feel the least risk. So if a market represents too many risks, naturally this limited supply chain and all other professional skill, the employees, etc., they will naturally go to other markets. So, as an international developer, we would suggest that the government and also the authorities to re-examine the offshore development policies, which has been invented, which has been drafted more than 5 years ago already. So the big context today, which is happening today, need to be think twice. And secondly, as we just mentioned, the technical and financing are 2 pillars to make projects. We definitely need the project bankability and constructability to be improved. Meaning that the local content, meaning that the short timing, meaning that all the other limitations that we have currently, maybe it's time to rethink about them. And third, when it comes to floating technology, it's still a very nascent market. We have to remember that it's not comparable comparing to the fixed bottom technology, which is relatively more matured. So if we want to promote floating, we definitely need to set a special place for it. And lastly, in EDF Renewables, we embrace R&D. This is the philosophy and also the spirit of the group. We definitely would like the government to continue to encourage the R&D so that we can accompany the new technology innovation on the Taiwanese market. Lastly, thank you very much for having us again. I'm very happy to be back to Taiwan after 20 years in France. So thank you. Let's continue to do the right things. Let's continue to do the right things better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Zhang, for the wonderful sharing. Thank you. And next, please welcome Regional Head of Asia Development at Northland Power, Ms. Beth Weddleworth. Welcome. Ms. Weddleworth will share her presentation on strategic offshore wind development in Asia Pacific. Welcome.
Hello, I hope everyone can hear me. So my name's Beth, and I'm the Regional Development Head for Northland Power. I've been based in Asia for about 8 years, living between Japan and Taiwan, so hopefully I can share a few of the lessons learned that I've experienced over the last few years out here in the Asia region. But I kind of have a question for the audience, slightly to wake everybody up for a second. It's not a quiz, so it's just your own opinion. So just raise your hand if you think offshore wind is challenging. Okay, that's mostly honest. Now leave your hand up if you think offshore wind is also fun. Okay, good. Those are the developers in the room. So those are the developers, those are the exciting people. We like to create something from nothing, and that's me. So my job is to lead development for Northland Power. We predominantly focus on offshore wind here in the region. And we've been developing, owning, and operating offshore wind for the last 10 plus years. But for Northland Power, one of the Canadians' largest owner-operator of renewables, we've been in Taiwan and Asia since 2016. We have operations in Taiwan, we have operations in Tokyo and in Seoul in Korea, and we really focus our business on offshore wind. And what we would like to say is we're a trusted partner, whether we're a trusted partner of the government, the communities, the supply chain. We're here to stay for the long term, and we're here to work together to work on a better future for each of these countries for offshore wind. Our global presence is not just here in Asia, but we leverage on the experience both in our home markets of Canada and our experience in our European offshore wind sector. I could talk about Northland all day, but I actually want to focus more on what I think around how to unlock Asia for offshore wind. I think it's more interesting if we focus on tangible lessons learned that we can actually bring to each of the countries. So recently, I started to learn to cook. And don't worry, none of you have to eat my food. It's a very select group, and they're still alive, so it's all okay. And what I was realizing when I was cooking was that it's not just an equation. It's not just this and this and that, but it's the right amount of everything that's actually going to make something work or taste good, hopefully. So I was thinking about Asia and what is key to making an offshore wind market. And I think what's really important is that we put Asia Pacific in the context of these ingredients. So firstly, you need an inherent need for energy or a commitment to decarbonize. And we have to congratulate the governments of Taiwan, Korea, and Japan for strong government targets that actually lead us into this area. Secondly, you need to have quite a lot of actually strong technical potential, so including wind resource, good ground conditions, and infrastructure to be able to actually realize offshore wind. Okay, tick. We have some of that across Japan, Taiwan, and Korea. A lot of coastline, a lot of wind, a lot of water. We've got more incentives from the government that give us investment confidence. So the targets of 10 gigawatts, 15 gigawatts, 45 gigawatts in markets like Japan do signal to developers and owner-operators like ourselves that these are places we should invest. So that's also a big tick as to why we'll have an offshore wind market. And finally, the mechanisms. Is there a mechanism to secure a site? Is there a mechanism to award areas to developers, to operators, to actually proceed and actually build projects? And tick, both Japan, Taiwan, Korea all have those mechanisms. So overall, in Asia, we have all the key ingredients. So how do we actually make a successful offshore wind market? Now, you would say that we have had some successes, but what I'm talking about is the goals that Gunnar and others spoke about in realizing the huge potential that Asia has. So I was thinking a little bit about this, and this is my opinion that firstly, we need to define what success is. Now, I just mentioned I'm a developer, but actually having a really large development pipeline is not that interesting. What's really interesting for me is seeing operational wind farms in the water. Success should be defined as operational projects, not just large development pipelines, which means we need quite a few things to actually get there. We know the targets are strong. We know that the inherent need is there, but actually, how do we get to an operational wind farm? So I broke it down into 6 areas. I thought that was lucky if we went for 6, so being in the right place. So how to regionalize best practice. So this is not just taking lessons learned in Europe or other offshore wind markets and making them fit Asia. It's actually the things that the MOEA was speaking about and the BOE. We've got some really good processes already in place where you've run tenders and you've run auctions. How are we sharing that knowledge with MOTI in Korea? How are we sharing that knowledge with METI in Japan? You know, there's a lot of lessons learned that each of the governments have done that we need to make sure is actually shared. You know, maybe it's administrative process or it's maybe just the scoring criteria. But how do you actually share the lessons between each of the governments? Because each of you have done your own thing that's, you know, all to the same goal, but how do we actually fit it together and make it a little bit more coherent and sustainable? The second one, I think also EDF mentioned it as well, is the development processes. And I think, Gunnar, you also said it. Development takes a long time. It's not as simple as maybe in the European markets where you bid a project and you start to build it. Here in Asia, you bid it and then you start to develop it. Processes such as environmental impact assessments or certification, especially around floating and other technologies, takes an incredibly long time. Taiwan did a very good job of actually leveraging on a more national EIA that then saved developers considerable time when they came to do their bidding. Whereas in markets like Japan and Korea, an EIA currently takes 4 or 5 years to complete. That's a lot of time that's taken up in a process. Whereas we've seen it work here in Taiwan, how do we transfer that knowledge that the environment will be okay if we shorten the process? So again, making the clarity of the development processes to speed it up. Now, offtake clarity, my colleague will speak a little bit more of this on a panel tomorrow, but you know, the route to market, I mentioned an operational wind farm is success, but we do need to sell the power somewhere. It does need to go somewhere. So I think earlier in the process, the better, in order to get the clarity that there is a route to market. And sometimes no offtake is also clarity. So if it's a market where we now are bidding 0, or it's a market where it's a feed-in premium, or now we're moving to CPPAs, just knowing that allows IPPs like ourselves to plan accordingly earlier in the process to make sure that we're spending against something we know that's going to happen. International partnerships. As I mentioned, I've worked in Japan for a long time, and I've also worked in Korea and Taiwan. And what I've always loved is learning from the local companies. So they know what they know about the local environment, and we know what we know about offshore wind. And so together it's a great collaboration. However, there are some barriers in some of these markets that sort of push you into different structures. So maybe more local or more international. And I think it's really important that when we have a skills shortage more globally, that we share those knowledge between developers, between local developers, between international players, in order to, you know, form stronger partnerships. Again, it's not about having large development pipelines, it's about getting projects over the finish line. And so I think partnerships can help you do that and can help you realize operational wind farms. I think EDF also just alluded to it as well, infrastructure enhancements. It's not as simple as just building. Also, I've been told it's not like Lego. So we need more and more infrastructure. So that is in Korea, we need to reinforce the grid. So the recent grid announcement will help us understand more strategically where to bid. I think the round 3 auction was very helpful, where it actually told us where the grid connections were going to be, so we knew what capacity was available. And in Japan, we need to also streamline this process as well and look for regional updates, regional upgrades of both infrastructure in the windy areas, focusing on LCOE. Something like building the grid infrastructure and the ports in the areas with the lowest cost of energy for a project, and not just where the developer shouts the loudest. So overall, I think Asia has so much potential to reach its success, to reach its goal with operational wind farms. But what I think is that we need to combine our strengths. We need to treat ourselves like a region. We need to act like a region, whether it's talking about the supply chain, whether it's standardizing policies, whether it's just having the similar processes. We talked earlier a little bit, I mean, Gunnar, you said, people are going into Europe for larger targets. Together, if you combine our Asia targets, we're also one of the biggest targets in the world. So if we treat ourselves as a region and act as a region, we're definitely stronger together. So I just want to leave you with that thought that overall, I believe that if we act and exchange knowledge between each of us, then together we'll be a combined strength, and together we will be able to unlock the offshore wind potential in Asia. Thank you.
Many thanks to Ms. Weatherworth for the wonderful speech. And next, please welcome Head of Engineering, APAC, RWE, Ms. Tanya Moreira, for her speech. Please welcome. Ms. Moreira will share her presentation on unlocking the offshore wind potential in APAC region. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tanya. What a responsibility after two strong women has been before me. Was really nice to see what Beth said about the challenge of offshore wind and also the challenge of APAC. But also super cool to see so many women driving that process here in Asia Pacific. So I'm always pushing that. And I believe we have a very good example also here that our European colleagues can follow as well. I'm actually an engineer. So being an engineer, I also like optimization. And therefore, I'm going to leave the video to do a little bit of the commercial part, and I will focus more later on our presence and what we are doing in APAC.
Our world is changing, and we are changing with it. For a sustainable tomorrow, swift action is needed if we are to reach the global net zero targets by 2050. As one of the world's leading companies in renewable energy, RWE is actively driving forward the energy transition. We are active on 5 continents, have more than 20 years of experience in offshore wind, are dedicated to supporting local communities. We are the #2 offshore player globally and will significantly reduce CO2 emissions, help to decarbonize the industry, boost local economies, create new jobs, and support governments in reaching their climate targets to secure a better tomorrow for the people. We actively shape the future as part of society. Close to our hearts are the environment and wildlife, the people in local communities around the world, and the health and safety of our employees. And we have already achieved a lot. We have installed more than 17 wind farms with a total capacity of around 5 gigawatts worldwide. With every new wind farm, we create several hundreds of direct and indirect local jobs. Together, our offshore wind farms are saving more than 10 million tons of CO2 every year. Every year, we invest millions of euros in harbors, educational programs, local organizations, and much more. But we want to go even further. With its growing green strategy, RWE is investing 50 billion euros gross cash until 2030. Our portfolio in 2030 is powerful and green. 50 gigawatts net installed capacity across green energy technologies. Our offshore installed net capacity will triple by then to 8 gigawatts. With innovative solutions, we are already tackling tomorrow's challenges today. We are proud to give wings to the energy transition.
I think Gunnar has said that on your calculations that we'll see around 300 billion investment in the next in this decade, in the next couple of years, and we are investing around 50 billion. And you see that the amount of projects already on the pipeline it's really substantial. So it's very interesting to see, although we have also seen from previous presentations a large amount being invested in the US, in Europe, but I still believe that APAC will definitely continue being, and for time being, and for the next generation push, especially in terms of supply chain as well, is going to be a very, I would say, important role on those $3 billion investment that we'll see in offshore wind. So in terms of what we are doing in APAC, it's very important for us that it's also a partnerships with a supply chain, innovation. Some of our colleagues also touch base on that. Work together with government to set up the grid capacity, the infrastructure capacity. But more important, and most of you that knows me very well knows that I'm very people's people. So very, very important as well is to work together with our community, making sure that if we are going to build all the offshore wind farms, and if we are going to invest 300 billion in the next couple of years, we also need to make sure that we do that together with the different communities around the APAC. So high-class partnerships. I think that is really, really important. And I have been speaking in Japan, in Korea, and everyone asking me the same questions. How can we work together? How can we develop offshore wind, but also have the sustainability responsibility and the social responsibility moving forward? So for me, this is really, really important. And I also think that, coming here today, addressing all of you guys today, it's also very important for me because sometimes you also need to understand what are the challenges, where are the opportunities, and also, refocus, take a break, refocus, come back a little bit stronger, and also make sure that we work together in the region. And I think what Beth said was really, really important because Europe is very strong, but so APAC could be if we work together, if we collaborate. So I think there is a massive opportunity for us to work together in Taiwan, in Japan, in Korea, new markets coming up as Vietnam, Australia, and I think APAC can really, really outlook and be much more stronger in the following years compared to Europe, US. And I think we need to have that lessons learned from the projects we have worked and move forward from that. And I always say, being an engineer and being in the industry for over 15 years, and before that, I worked also in infrastructure projects. And I always say that the lessons learned I had and the knowledge transfer that I had between projects I have worked on in different markets. I have worked in Brazil, I have worked in Europe, and I have been working in APAC for the last 12 years. The first time I actually flew to Taiwan was back in 2011 for a meeting with the government to set up to discuss about renewable policy, and been collaborating and working with the APAC region since then. I think it's really important to look back and to Europe? Why Europe is being so successful? Can we leverage from that success? And I think it's very, very important. And we have been talking a lot as well about, scale, economy of scale. But also for me, it's equally important, diversification of your portfolio. So I think Gunnar touched base on that as well, quite, which I'm going to be talking now. Also, how we are going to play forward. Bottom fixed has been quite successful. I think Taiwan, I have been involved on the projects in Taiwan, so we know that can be deployed. But what is next? Yeah, floating, green hydrogen. How can we get that to the mix? Can we also have solar together with offshore? And looking at diversification, how can we diversify the portfolio? How can we exchange the knowledge between different technologies? And how can together we kind of bring that together, learning from Europe, and Europe is saying, okay, the green hydrogen is going to be the focus of the next couple of years, but APAC also can play a huge part on that. And I think it's really, really important to look at diversification, to look at different technologies, and to try to, with the government, to work together to see how we can move it forward, and how can we learn from each other. I tend to say that I don't see any developer as a competitor. I always say them as my colleagues, peer colleagues, because I always say that working in renewables is one of my passions. I have been doing that and working for many years, but we are much better working together. So if we work together, if we exchange knowledge, if we know, learning from all the lessons learned, a colleague used to call the bumps on the roads, and I took it from that. We always have the challenge, the bumps on the roads, but it's always important to learn from the bumps on the roads and become stronger. And if we work as an industry together, we can only succeed. So that's a little bit for me in terms of what I'm going to be doing next, what we are going to be doing next. It's definitely continuing. We have been operating 19 offshore wind projects back in Europe. We are developing our first projects in the US. We are really strongly investing in the APAC market. But for me, it's really also very important not to be so comfortable. Bottom fixed, we know, we have the know-how. But we needed to look at the other technology. We needed to learn it. We needed to look at future as well. So I have been spending a lot of my time, because I'm an engineer, so I really like the technical challenge. So I have been investing a lot on floating, and also learning a little bit more about hydrogen. I did work on the dark side of the business, so I have experience from oil and gas, and I think that's also important, because you learn from the industry you have worked, and then you say, okay, how can I leverage that experience moving forward? So definitely, I would say, especially for APAC, I would like to see more floating technology. I would like to see green hydrogen on the agenda from the government. So I would like the government not only looking at offshore wind, but how we can combine. We can look at battery storage. We can look at floating solar. How can we combine that on a project? And also thinking about then large scale. So just back a little bit of our WE portfolio, and you can see we learned a lot from bottom fixed, but the only project there on the line that you see as a floating project is our California floating project, where we are at the moment developing is 1.6 gigawatts. Floating. We have learned from our development demonstration projects, which it's already in operation. And now how can we leverage that into, the next scale, the commercial scale of the projects? And for me, this is really important, but it's also important looking at industrialization, because we can only go from the demonstration project into large scale project if we work, and someone said said about the legal, I actually always say the jigsaw approach, but we just need to work collaboratively. So we can only go from demonstration into larger scale if we look at supply chain and if we collaboratively together look at a region, not only specific to Taiwan, Japan, Korea, Australia coming up, other markets, but how can we work together as a region? How can we look at floating industrialization as an APAC level? How can we push the cost down? How can we work together to make that economically feasible? So we have, as I said, been very successful in our demonstrations, but we also now need to take that knowledge, but push that into the large-scale commercial project. But we don't want to do that alone. We wanted to do that with our partners. We wanted to do that with all of you. I think we have really in this industry a massive global talent, and especially in the APAC. I'm super proud of the team we have here and our colleagues and our other developers as well. So how can collaboratively think about how we take a demonstration project and moving into a commercial and make that economical feasible, because as Beth was also mentioning, we need also to make sure that we go through the financial investment decision. We need a project that is bankable. We need to make sure that we have our investments returns. So how can collaboratively we can push that price down and we can make it floating as successful as bottom fix was, as I showed before the number of projects that we have been operating and developing in the US and in Europe. But how can we take that, lessons learned, bring it back to APAC and make that? So we have just launched our TetraSpar Innovation Challenge. Is open now, so the website is there, and we would like all of you to come to us and with some ideas, how can we improve and how can we work together to push floating technology forward. So it's going to be closed on 18th of June, but I hope that all of you can also collaborate together with RWE and our partners. The last, I know the time is out, but as I know Mark was going to be here as well, I also wanted to make sure that although our challenges for the TetraSpar, we are also looking at other technologies. And as you can see here, we are also working with a principal power in other markets. We're also looking with SBM, working with SBM. We have not chosen the technology. We would like also to work with different technologies and with different partners and making sure that we collaborate together and we find the optimal solution moving forward. Very, very quickly, finishing my last one, I just wanted to take the 3 takeaways from this, and I think the others that has been discussing here already touched base on that. I think APAC has a huge potential for all of us to be successful in the region if we work as a team, if we collaborate. So teamwork for me is one of the most important things we have as an industry to get together to make it successful. But we also need to work collaboratively with the supply chain and with the government, because we also need to make sure that to succeed, the industry to succeed, we need also to make sure that it's bankable, that we have the grid, we have the infrastructure, we have the supply chain. And if we work together, we can definitely succeed. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Moreira, for your presentation. Please return to your seat. Next, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Global Head of Offshore Projects, Siemens Gamesa Renewable Energy, Mr. James Oxborough, to share his presentation on outlook of offshore wind development in APAC region. Welcome.
So Tanya, I think the pressure's very much on me now, huh? 3 very strong women. So I do my best to keep everybody engaged and energized for the next 15 minutes. Find the Beeper. So, yeah, I want to firstly just say a little bit about what we're doing in Siemens Gamesa at the moment globally, and also in the offshore business in APAC, before touching on some of the challenges that we see in the market and learnings we have from the ongoing projects, before reflecting a little bit, as has been done up to now, on the future for the market and how we progress. So firstly, I've been very fortunate in that I joined Siemens Gamesa back in 2010 when the market was just taking off in the UK, and I kind of enjoyed that wave. Then moving to Germany in 2014, had the same experience there, and then coming across to Taiwan and the APAC region in 2019, where I've seen that real kind of energy and enthusiasm of a new market again growing, with so many new talents coming in to helping to develop and build the industry. And it's been a fantastic journey. I think as Gunnar mentioned earlier, we have 58 gigawatts installed now globally. SGRE is currently in the process of executing another 22 gigawatts of projects globally. And those spread, as you can see there from the flags, very much around the world. It's been a very, I think, interesting time to see the market develop from a very kind of closed circle within Europe to one that's expanded, firstly for us into the APAC region with the first Formosa projects, and now also into the US. So very, very busy time for us, and it's also caused us the need to kind of reflect on how we deliver our projects and how we better shape the business to meet the global demands that we now have. And focusing for a second on the APAC market in particular, so we have projects that are currently in execution in three countries. Taiwan, of course, the key cornerstone to this, and certainly we want it to stay that way. We've delivered the Formosa 1 and Formosa 1 Phase 2 project as well, the Formosa 2 project, which I'll touch on shortly. We have Yunlin, Greater Changhua, and Hailong in the making. And then elsewhere within the region, we have Ishikari, which will go into installation for us within the next couple of months, and a further project as well in Korea, which will go into construction next year. So a lot going on for us, and this is necessitated the real growth of our business here in Taiwan, where we now have, I think, around about 350 employees. And reflecting a little bit more generally on the market here in APAC. So as I mentioned, we've seen Taiwan as very much the front runner, and has the potential to stay that way if it's played right. We've had Japan, Korea follow suit with projects coming through in those countries now. And then we expect a kind of third wave of new joiners coming into the market as well, with some further offshore projects in Vietnam, Australia, and so forth, really to kind of broaden the horizon that we have within offshore wind in the market here. A number of important aspects which I wanted to touch on, which I think are key to the real success of the market, and I think some of these have been covered quite well already. The first is the attractive potential of offshore wind farm sites and the conducive environment to support their development. So we really need to ensure that we have good potential sites within the countries of execution, which we very much see here off the west coast of Taiwan with relatively shallow water depths, good grid infrastructure, high average wind speeds, the kind of the perfect setup in that respect, and similar stories in some of the other countries which develop now in the region. Also key from our perspective is clear policies with roadmaps in place to ensure economic scale to be reached with supportive incentive mechanisms. And I think the key thing here for me, two aspects, the economies of scale and the supportive incentive mechanisms. Again, as was already mentioned, there's huge growth globally within the industry, a huge increase in the size of projects in the European market, but also the US market, and for countries in APAC to compete with this, they need to adapt accordingly. If you take the example of a marine contractor operating a jack-up vessel, if you've got projects in excess of a gigawatt in Europe, and a potential for very high utilization of that vessel, it's a very difficult business case to then bring that vessel to APAC to work in the market here for projects in the region of 400 or 500 megawatts. Central and consistency in central and regional government policy, again, really key for us, and I think this is also one of the learnings we've had from the last years. Key to many of us is the health and safety of our employees, our workforce, and when it comes to things like emergency response, it's very important that all of the agencies and aspects of government that we're engaging with have a very supportive and aligned approach to how we manage this between the respective parties. And I think in Taiwan, we've seen some great dialogue over the last years between those involved in the industry and different parts of government to help support this. Establishment of fit-for-purpose infrastructure to support offshore wind. So again, the need here for really strong, robust infrastructure, particularly within our ports, with good logistics for moving components apart, around high bearing capacities and so forth. And again, this is critical if you look at the size of the turbines and infrastructure that we're installing now, and the need to be able to move components effectively from factories and so forth to support the development of these new projects. Yeah. And I think the same applies for the next 2 points. The penultimate point, adoption of country regulations to offshore industry needs. Again, really taking stock of the fact that the market here is relatively new compared to Europe, and it's very important that the legislative framework that we have to support the industry is really fit for purpose. So, for example, the ease with which vessel permits can be secured to allow vessels to keep running, the fit for purpose of the labor regulations for offshore wind workers, all of these aspects are really key for the kind of smooth operation of our projects. Yeah. And I think we've seen a lot of challenges over the last years which have really limited the industry's ability to be nimble in terms of how we react to certain issues that we faced, and keep vessels utilized really effectively continuously on projects and minimize downtime. And the last point, I think, again, very clearly articulated by some of the speakers previously, the setup of a balanced localization approach. So again, from us, it simply does not make sense to force localization of components into a market where they're not naturally developed, where they don't have the experience within that market of producing those components, and it creates additional risk and exposure for both us and developers. And I think in the market now where we see a real urge to de-risk projects, particularly for OEMs such as ourselves, there's a need to really ensure that balance is right. To reflect a little bit on Formosa 2 and some of the learnings that we've had from this project. So I think as you're probably aware, the project had its inauguration last week, which was a very successful event. We have now, I think, achieved takeover of all turbines in the project, which is a great achievement. It's been a challenging battle, I should say, through the last years, dealing with the complexities from COVID. What has really helped us is the willingness of the government to engage and support us in addressing certain issues. But I think what can't be underestimated is the impact that let's say, some of the disruption to the Taiwanese projects has also had on our global portfolio. So to take an example, the projects that we've had in execution over the last years, where we've had to bring in significant amount of resources to support with construction, those resources have had to go for a 2-week quarantine period when they've been working on a back-to-back basis rotation. That's required us to increase our resource allocation to the market here by 50%. That had an impact, of course, on our ability globally to execute projects, and caused disruption and delay, not just within the market here, but globally. Yeah. So very, very important that I think that the challenges that we've seen within the market here and their ramifications elsewhere are not underestimated. It's very, very key for us that we look to de-risk the projects that we have coming into execution, to ensure that we have a smooth process and that timelines are met. For every project that is delayed by a year, we're tying up resources for an additional year, and those resources were planned for something else. And it's not just in terms of personnel, but also the same applies for vessels, lifting equipment, and so forth. Otherwise, I think what is really key learning for us from Formosa 2, firstly, requirement to be present within the country of execution. I think, as we've seen with all of the projects that we have in construction at the moment, Changhua, Formosa 2, Yunlin, and so forth, these projects can't be managed from a headquarters in Europe. You need expertise on the ground in the place of execution. And I'm not talking about importing 100 expats to deliver a project. I'm talking about bringing in some key experts that are needed to bulk up the team, but also bringing in local talent and helping and supporting the development of that local talent for longevity of the industry locally as well. And that has been a key focus for us within the region here. As I mentioned, we have around about 350 employees now in Taiwan. The vast majority of those are Taiwanese. And that's really critical, yeah, that we bring on board and develop and support the growth of the talent locally. Be present. Second one, be realistic and ensure you have redundancy. Operating in the market here, very, very different from maybe our home turf within Europe. There's a lot of unforeseen challenges and surprises, and it's critical that those are planned for. Yeah, we simply can't expect the projects here to be executed at the same speed and in the same manner as we do in Europe, at least not for the early ones. And the third point is engagement. Engagement with key stakeholders, with government agencies and so forth, to really sort of early address the challenges that we face and work through the problems that we foresee. So I'm conscious of time, so I'll keep moving on. This is the last slide, and again, as was already mentioned today, huge anticipated growth within the market globally, particularly within the European market, where you see expectation for massive expansion. And if you look at the players that we have operating in the market now and the uncertainty we've had within the last years, there is a tendency to really focus on projects which have the lowest risk exposure. And we heard this earlier as well. Yeah? And that means that where we have bigger projects that have high certainty within a short timeline for development, within a market where we have the resources and expertise and know we can develop, tends to get priority. So for a market like Taiwan, Japan, Korea, 1 minute, we need to ensure that it remains attractive, that we have the right mix to put into the pot to ensure that players like ourselves, like some of the marine contractors, like the developers, want to be here and want to develop here. And I think there remains a significant risk of some of the countries in APAC falling behind other markets globally if we aren't nimble, if we don't adapt, if we don't ensure the policy is really fit for purpose. Because there simply is not the capacity there within our supply chain and within the vessel market and so forth to feed the expected growth within the market. So we need countries to fight for the projects that they want to develop. Yeah, competition is scarce, resources are scarce, vessel availability, highly skilled technicians, all in heavy demand globally. Again, it's down to all of us to help ensure that we have the tools that we need and the people we need to develop the business and the industry further. But we are growing at an incredible rate, and there will continue to be challenges and shortages. And the last point, transparency, time's up. Timelines and implementation probability of APAC projects needs to be enhanced. Again, this comes back to the point I raised earlier. If we're looking at projects in Japan, for example, which have maybe an 8-year development horizon, it's difficult to justify the dedication of resources to projects like that compared to projects which have a very high certainty within a very short timeline for execution. So again, very, very important that there is that certainty within the markets, and there's a clear, transparent pipeline for the development of the projects that we face. I think that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oxborough, for the wonderful presentation. And now, please welcome our next speaker, Director of Deal Advisory and Government and Infrastructure, KPMG Taiwan, Mr. Kevin Chan. Welcome. Dr. Chan will be sharing his presentation on looking at offshore wind in Asia Pacific from a finance perspective. Welcome. Please give him a round of applause. Welcome.
It's great to see everyone here. I'm Kevin from KPMG Taiwan team. We provide financial advisory across the major countries, including Europe, UK, and China. In the past decade, we provide financial advisory service across the project life cycle, from the beginning bidding to the midterm project management until the end of restructure. Asia Pacific market is the largest market around the world. About the Asia Pacific market, we must mention the China market and the Taiwan market. Several years ago, I am in the KPMG Beijing team. At that time, China market is booming. Before the 2010, China market facing a very quickly growing. But after that, China market facing the high abandon rate in the following coming years due to the transmission and the local demanding issues. Otherwise, China market is a very specific market. Almost all of the projects are won by the SOE, the state-owned enterprise. Unlike China market, Taiwan market is more open for the foreign investors. Also, Taiwan market is the second largest market in the future. Our government have done a great job. So you can see in the past 5 years, the growth rate in Taiwan market reached the 15%. And in the recent years, 16% growth rate were done by the government policy. As the first speaker mentioned before, the Taiwan goal is to set up 20% renewable of total energy supply. So in the current 5 years, more than 6 gigawatts will be set up, and in the next coming 10 years, 15 gigawatts will be released. Currently, we are in the phase 3. That is a very amazing thing. Almost all of the bidders set up the zero FIT price. That shows all bidders are more confident with us. Also, the first speaker mentioned before, the localization will be the contingent liability and will increase the cost of the foreign investor. Currently, we can see in the future 10 years, the schedule are full. According to the government policy, a very huge capacity will be set up during 10 years. But due to some issues about the COVID-19 and some financial risk, almost all of the projects were delayed right now, at least 1 year. So we conclude the financial risk in our experience in the PACE-DD result. First, the operation model is a little bit complicated. The participants must work together between the EPC, investor, bank, and the Thai Power. Of course, they have a lot of argument between each other. They have a different duty, and they are negotiate the price. Second, the financial model is a very high percentage leverage. Almost all of the projects are 80% using the debt financing. That means just a little bit change in the revenue or capital expenditure will make a huge impact on the cash flow and the financial model. So we conclude the risk we find in the DD report. Currently, the most risky things is the capital cost risk, construction risk, and the revenue risk. First, United States raised the interest rate since the mid of last year. That make a lot of investors lose more than $1 million. In the past, Taiwan is a low interest rate country, but right now, more than 2% are increased. So we hear about the bidder is complain and negotiates with the bank. Second, due to the COVID-19 and the Russia war, everything is more and more expensive here, especially the material and the human resource. And right now, it's very difficult to find qualified people in Taiwan. So it's not the money, only the money issue, but also lack of the qualified people. And the third risk is the revenue risk. Everyone knows in the phase 3, all bidders set up the zero FIT. That means they put all bet on the CPPA, but the bank and the creditor didn't think so. They think the only qualified creditor or buyer will be the Fortune 500 company, such as TSMC or Foxconn in Taiwan. So they are worried about the phase 3 winner cannot find a stable buyer here. And the post-financial phase that happened roughly in the Taiwan is a natural disaster. Every year, several typhoons cross Taiwan and make a lot of damage. Even the damage can be covered by the insurance, but the cash flow will be still hurt. So this is the total risk. Finally, even we face so much risk in the past, we still believe the Taiwan wind project will be better and better here. And congratulations to the phase 3 bidders. They are more confident with us. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, next please welcome Head of Japan and Korea Research at Bloomberg NEF, Mr. David Kong, for his speech. Please welcome.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to present at the World Forum Offshore Wind Summit in Taiwan. My name is David Kang, and I manage Japan and Korea research at Bloomberg NEF. Now, it's a great pleasure to share with you today the research that my colleagues around the world are conducting on the global energy transition. For those of you who may not be familiar with Bloomberg NEF, we are a strategic research provider covering global commodities markets and the disruptive technologies across power, transport, industry, buildings, and agriculture that are driving the transition to a low-carbon economy. And today, I'd like to share with you an overview of global offshore wind market, as well as some of the latest trends that are shaping the global offshore wind industry. But before we dive in, I would like to take a step back and think about where the energy industry is today. Last year was a truly tumultuous and an eventful year in the global energy transition. With the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we saw energy commodity prices break new records across the board. And geopolitical risk has now become more intertwined with national energy issues than ever before. As you can see from this chart, 2022 was also the first year we saw the levelized cost of electricity, or LCOE, of clean energy technologies like solar, onshore winds, and battery storage increase year on year. And this is the first time we've seen all three of these technologies report rise in cost since BNEF has been tracking this data for over 10 years. And that was driven by multiple factors, including the rise in debt costs, the rise in inflation, as well as supply chain issues for key components of these technologies. So as the energy crisis unfolded last year, there was a lot of concern around whether this would fundamentally slow the energy transition. But despite these challenges, we actually saw global investments in energy transition exceed $1 trillion for the first time in 2022. So these are investments in clean energy supply, such as renewable energy, battery, hydrogen, and also CCS. We also track clean energy demand sources like electric vehicles, charging infrastructure, and also heat pumps. And we estimate a total of $1.1 trillion was invested last year across these sectors. And that marks a 31% growth from the year before. Now, to put this number into perspective, this means we are now seeing the scale of clean energy investment being matched with investment in fossil fuels globally. So back in 2018, for every $1 invested in global fossil fuel sector, we saw about 50 cents, around half, being invested in energy transition sectors, as you can see in this chart. But that ratio has quickly caught up. And in 2022, clean energy investment is now on par with fossil fuel. And this year, we expect to see those green bars rise above the red bars of fossil fuel investments for the first time. If we look at what's driving these investments, wind and solar really dominate the investment scene. We estimate onshore and offshore wind projects attracted around $174 billion last year, and that's about 35% of the total investments in renewable energy sector globally. Now, let's take a look at the long-term outlook of the wind sector. We expect cumulative wind capacity to surpass 1,000 gigawatts, so 1 terawatt this year, which is a very meaningful milestone. And by 2030, we expect cumulative installations to almost double to 1.9 terawatts. And a lot of that incremental growth, as you can see in this chart, will be driven by offshore wind. So last year, we saw about 98 gigawatts of new wind capacity come online. And offshore wind accounted for just 13% of that. But as more offshore wind markets move from pilot stage to commercial scale markets, we expect offshore wind to account for about 30% of new capacity additions in 2030. And by 2035, global offshore wind capacity is set to reach 519 gigawatts globally. So that's a tenfold increase from where the industry is today. If we look at how this growth will progress in the coming years, we see three distinct stages of development. So in the near term, annual installations will hover around 10 to 20 gigawatt and mostly dominated by projects in China. But after 2025, we start to see significant diversification in installed markets. So, for example, US, UK, and Germany combined will start adding around 10 gigawatts annually. And Asian markets, including Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea, also become increasingly significant. So as you can see from this chart, the growth in the second stage is really driven by the new markets that are in infant stage today. And the final stage in post-2030 is the stabilization of new builds at around 40 to 50 gigawatt annually. So as these newer markets become more mature, the industry's ability to deliver on projects also gets increasingly affected by local factors, such as local supply chain constraints, the availability of vessels, and also challenges around permitting and grid connection. So whether the industry could scale up further from this point will really depend on new policies and support mechanisms on offshore wind across these geographies. Now, let's dive into some of these specific countries. Since we have a lot of sessions in the summit today and tomorrow focusing on Taiwan market, I'd like to share with you some of the key developments in other APAC markets like Japan, Korea, India, and Australia. So first up, Japan. Japan market is still at its infant stage with only a few pilot projects installed so far, but we expect cumulative installations to exceed 4 gigawatt by 2030 and then quickly scale up to reach 10 gigawatt by 2035. And one of the key developments to look out for in Japan is that the Japanese government is now increasingly focusing on non-price criteria in their offshore wind auction. So based on the latest proposed auction rules, developers can score more points if their projects have shorter development timeline. So what this means is that bidders can no longer count on future technology developments to deliver projects at lower cost, similar to the way that Mitsubishi's consortium won all 3 sites in the first round of auction last year. So we're starting to see developers trying to really differentiate their projects by streamlining their development process to shorten that development timeline, and also adding new technologies like energy storage and hydrogen electrolyzers into their project design to win extra points in these auctions. South Korea is another market we expect to see big growth in the coming years. So based on the status of projects that are under development, we expect commercial scale projects to start coming online from 2026 and reach cumulative installations of around 5 gigawatt by 2030. Now, it's worth noting that our forecast is well below the government's target to have 12 gigawatt of offshore wind by 2030. And that's because most of these projects still face fierce opposition from local communities, including fisheries and the local residents that are living near the shore of the offshore wind sites. And we're seeing many projects take over 10 years just to obtain the necessary permits, and many developers end up abandoning their projects during that long community engagement process. But because of these challenges, Korea is also moving very quickly to develop floating offshore wind projects, which are generally subject to less opposition from local fisheries and the local communities. So the government also grants 30 to 40% higher subsidy for floating projects, and that's also accelerating the development in this sector. So given the status of some of the projects that are currently under development in Korea, we expect South Korea to become one of the first countries to commission a 100 megawatt scale floating project within this decade. Now, there are a few smaller markets in APAC, like India and Australia, where momentum is slowly building up, but there's still high uncertainty. So for example, India made its first foray into offshore wind market last year with a tender for a site survey in the southern part of the coast. But winning this tender doesn't actually guarantee a project because it only grants rights for site survey, such as wind speed assessment and geological studies. There will be a follow-up auction that will grant project permits, but developers still need to find their own power off-takers for the project because the federal and state governments will not be responsible for any type of offtake for the wind projects. So because of these challenges, we expect India's offshore wind market to see slow development in the near term. And the projects that participate in this first round of auction will likely come online after 2030. Australia market is at a very early stage as well. Ever since the Australian government announced the Offshore Electricity Infrastructure Act in 2021, we've seen a flurry of new projects announced. And BNEF currently tracks over 46 gigawatts of announced projects in this market. But it's worth noting that none of them have managed to reach financial close so far. And the government support and subsidies for offshore wind projects is also very limited. So for this growing market interest in Australia to turn into actual project capacity, we'll need to see new supporting policies and also binding targets by the government for offshore wind. In the final part of my presentation, I'd like to touch on some of the trends that we are seeing globally that are shaping the offshore wind industry. First is the rising importance of non-price criteria in government auctions. If we look at the evaluation criteria of auctions around the world, the portion of non-price components varies significantly by region. So you have countries like UK on the left-hand side, where bid price is really the only thing that matters. But on the other hand, there are countries like Netherlands on the far right, where non-price criteria, including biodiversity, grid integration, and other qualitative metrics make up 90% of the total score. And what we're seeing is that a lot of these markets are now further expanding the non-price criteria in the auctions. So as I mentioned before, Japan will be granting higher scores on projects with early commissioning timeline. And South Korea has also strengthened the local content rule in its new auction mechanism. And even in UK, the government is considering to potentially include non-price criteria in the next round of auction in 2024. So that raises an important question as we think about the future of offshore wind, which is, will the cost continue to fall? If we look at the past 2 decades of CapEx trends, the cost trends for offshore wind project, it looks something like this. So in the early 2000s, the industry slowly began by installing pilot projects that are very close to the shore. And as more projects, particularly in Europe, ventured into deeper waters and became, so to speak, proper offshore wind projects, the CapEx started to increase as well because it obviously costs a lot more to install turbines in deeper waters. And then from 2010s, we saw waves of new auctions launched globally that accelerated cost competition and drove down prices. And now we are seeing the total CapEx of offshore wind projects formed around $2 to $3 million per megawatt hour in mature markets like Europe and China, and around $4 to $6 million per megawatt hour in emerging markets, like Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and the US. But as we start to see government auctions put more emphasis on non-price criteria like local content rule, environmental impact, and also social impact, we are seeing the cost reductions slow down in many of these markets. So it'd be interesting to see how the appetite for auction criteria that are set by these countries and governments really evolve over time, because that will fundamentally determine the future cost of offshore wind. The final point I'd like to highlight is that when we think about the future of offshore wind market, it's really important to differentiate the hype that's often created by aspirational government targets from the actual reality in the market. So this chart compares the different government targets for offshore wind by 2030 or 2035, and compares that against the BNEF's forecast, which is based on actual project pipeline and our assessment of the development environments in these markets. And as you can see, only a handful of markets, including Taiwan, Poland, and Belgium, which are highlighted in green in this chart, have a good chance of meeting their target. And that's largely thanks to supporting policies or auction mechanisms that are in place in these markets. But in most regions around the world that are marked in red in this chart, we can see the targets significantly outstrip the current reality. Now, closing this gap will require significant support from both the public and private sectors. We'll need to see new supporting policies around permitting and supply chain, as well as careful consideration in auction mechanism, for example, the degree of local content rule. We'll also need to see accelerated investments in supporting infrastructure, such as transmission lines, vessels, and also ports, to help scale the industry on a fundamental level. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention.
Many thanks to Mr. Kong for the wonderful presentation.